So the first few pieces of information here are out of a study conducted by the Los Alamos Lab, National Lab, and that is that in the early days of transmission of the novel coronavirus, before countermeasures are put in place, before cities are locked down, transportation's locked down. It looks like the number of infected people doubles every 2.4 days on average. That's their estimate. And a couple of other pieces of information is that on average, the time from exposure to the time that symptoms present in a person is about 4.2 days. And then subsequently, from symptoms to hospitalization, again in the early days, they were noticing in China 5.5 days. So before more rigorous management of the disease is implemented, we're looking at, based on what happened in China, about 9.7 days timeline from exposure to hospitalization. So, there are probably some decent-sized error bars on that, plus or minus several days at least, depending on the specific case. So we'll come back to that. We have 2 reported cases last I checked. The original case that was transferred to I think UC Davis, at least in that area, somewhere in that area. This was the first person to hit the news, was originally hospitalized February 15th, from what I can tell. That is 13 days ago. So hospitalization 13 days ago, plus that 9.7 days from initial exposure gives me about a rough estimate of 22.7 days since exposure for this individual. So just to take a step back, what I'm outlining here is the timeline for how long that this virus has been spreading within the community, given the earliest indication of community transmission, and assuming that it's been propagating since that time. So doubling every 2.4 days. We have 22.7 days since exposure. If we divide that by 2.4 days, doubling, that gives us 9.5 cycles. So 9.5 doublings since the original exposure here. So that's 2 to the power of 9.5. That is, at a minimum, 724 people currently infected. This timeline accounts for only this person's development. Because this is a community transmission case, there is some amount of time that it would have been transmitting the community prior to this person being infected, unless this person got it straight from someone who traveled, which could very well be the case. So this is our longest timeline we have so far. We don't have a lot of details, last I checked, released by Santa Clara County on the subsequent case identified today, but that's where this estimate lies. So moving over to the more recent news item in Santa Clara, all the information that I have currently is that there is someone who tested positive and they don't know where they got it. Now this person, it has been reported, has no contact with people who've traveled. So that tells me that this is at least the second step in a sequence of transmission from someone who traveled. That means that this person is not in the initial population that was exposed by the person who did travel, but is some subsequent generation of people who've received that since it originally infected someone. So we don't know. Of course, we don't know very much information about the timeline. We don't know when this person was hospitalized. But here is a second case of community transmission. And I'm going to just say that this person was hospitalized 2 days ago for the sake of this estimate. From what I've seen, it's very likely that this person's been hospitalized longer. I don't even know if the CDC can run a test in that short of a period of time and deliver some results back to the hospital, including coordination of collecting that sample. So this is a very, I'll say this is an underestimate. So the figures I'm presenting here are I'm trying to make them low estimates to be fair. So 2 days plus that 9.7 day period from exposure to hospitalization is 11.7 days since exposure. Again, figuring out how many doublings there have been since that time gives us 4.9 cycles. 2 to the 4.9 is 30 people currently infected on this timeline. Now, these two cases are quite a distance from each other geographically. So it's safe to assume that the communities involved in the transmission of this disease, that there are more than one community, and that the spread is happening in more than one location. I mean, until proven otherwise. We'll see. Hopefully they can ramp up testing now that they have evidence of this. I'm very much hoping that they will start testing anyone who has symptoms that look like this pneumonia, testing positive for influenza, etc. So if I add those two numbers together, that's 754 total in these two probably distinct, although related, very much related communities here. So 754 cases total today would be the estimate. I think this is a low estimate, and this is the total number of people who have contracted the virus, not necessarily the number of people who need any kind of assistance or care. So, but that's just for, what my estimate is. Now, again, doubling every 2.4 days. So that means that if the timeline here goes back further by another 2.4 days, then you can double this estimate. And then going forward through the weekend, that means that, on average, I mean, these are averages being used with averages, but the expectation then is that we would see, we're going to be hitting 1,500 cases by the end of the weekend, probably halfway through the weekend by this estimate.